Okay.
Dave, obviously, HIPAA is one of the top compliance issues. So any examples from a policy procedure perspective, because last week Steve picked up the CMS outline of all of the different, 162, 163, 164 areas of HIPAA compliance. So using those as use cases to then help these organizations and the team that'll be meeting on the 11th as a framework on how VSC would help support that implementation would be great.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log into VSC, and I'm going to do that on our test server. We're getting really close to a new release, so we'll be releasing 2.3, and so there's some features that I want to be able to show you, so I'm going to go ahead and log into the test system. But this is also the point where I say, if anything doesn't work, just keep in mind this is test. This is not a production system, so I probably am not going to run into any bugs, but if I do, I'm going to say, remember I told you this was the test system. Okay, so what I did was I logged into a sample organization that we set up, and this organization is called Those Darn Humans, and the reason for that is because I have a domain called Those Darn Humans. We can talk another day about why I happen to have a domain called thosedarnhumans.org, but I do. And so I set up this, this organization as a demonstration organization using that name. I'm going to go ahead and close this out so I can see a little bit better. Okay, so I've just logged in. I'm logged in as Beverly, and Beverly is the security officer for this organization. So when Beverly logs in, she can see this risk ribbon across the top, that piece that says people, places, technology, and vendors. So that's something that anybody who's involved in risk management for an organization can see, but other people, the people who are just kind of like the workforce members within an organization, they don't see this. So the key thing that we did with Virtual Security Center is we set it up with the idea that for the workforce, this would be a way that we could get people's policies to them, we could get training to them, and we could get security reminders to them. And so for most of the folks in an organization, and this is definitely true in the HIPAA world, for most people in the organization, they're just workforce members. And workforce members are important, but they don't have other roles within the organization as far as security is concerned. So for those people, what we need to do is make sure that they get policies or other documents sent to them, that they have a chance to read them, and that they acknowledge them, that they get security reminders regularly because HIPAA requires that, and that they get security training, either when they're onboarded or periodically, say every quarter, and then every year they get this refresher training. So Virtual Security Center is set up to solve those problems. For some organizations, we can do this without them ever having to log in. So we can send policies and security documents like a password standard. We can send those directly to their inbox. We can send awareness reminders directly to their inbox, and they can, and we can send training tasks to them in their inbox. For tasks or when they do policy acknowledgement, they'll click on a link and it will take them to the website, but they never have to log in. So these people don't need to really learn how to use another application. They're really just interacting with things in their inbox and experiencing their training, their awareness, their policies. So that's kind of a key thing that we do. Now, what we do have to do with clients, and we teach new clients to do this, is you have to make sure that you let everybody know that this is going to be happening so that they understand that messages that are coming from Virtual Security Center are not phishing messages. But once you've done that, then an organization can go in and do security pretty easily. All right, so if, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and log out. Let me take a look at who the people are in my organization, and I'll pick one. So here's one named Rose. And what I'm going to do with Rose is take a look at her roles. So Rose is set up as an email-only user, and she does not have any roles other than the workforce member, something that I was talking about earlier. Actually, because of that, I'm not going to pick Rose. I want to pick somebody who can log in. So we'll pick Timothy here. So Timothy is a regular user in the organization, and he has already viewed his policies, training, awareness, and documents. So he's actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give Timothy a new responsibility. I'm going to say that Timothy is also responsible for some of the facilities within the organization. And I'm going to mark a few types of data that Timothy might have. So I'm going to make a little change to Timothy. And the reason I'm doing this is because it will change what his policy requirements are. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to training, and I'm going to select a new training, which I'm going to send to Timothy. Timothy. All right, so now what happens is when I log into to Timothy's account, he is going to need to watch a training, and he's going to need to acknowledge some more policies. And you can see what happened here when I go to my people view. I already know that Timothy has more policies to acknowledge because in the policy column, I'm showing red because he has only viewed 18 of the 26 policy statements I need him to view. And then he's missing a training. So when I go in and log in as Timothy, we'll see those things in the login. Also, Timothy gets an email. I'm not going to show you the emails now, but you might have heard them dinging in the background because those actually go to me. So Timothy now has a new policy assignments, and he's got a new training to view. So I'm going to go ahead and log in now as Timothy. So when I log as Timothy, a couple things that you'll see here are, as I mentioned earlier, he does not have that risk view. So Timothy is a regular user in the organization. The things that we're trying to communicate to him are what his policies are, and we're sending him awareness reminders, and we're asking him to follow training. And those are the key things that we need Timothy to do. So now that I've done that, I can see policies that I need to acknowledge. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on policies. So these are the policies that were added because I gave him facility responsibility. When I did, it took the policy statements that I have for him because of his facility management roles, and it added them to the policy statements that he had because he's a workforce member. Now, because he has to acknowledge some policies, it actually is set up to hide the ones that he's already acknowledged. So you can see this little switch here to the right. If I click on this, then it shows the full length of all of the policy statements that I need him to follow. If I hide this, it shows just the ones that he hasn't acknowledged. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge these. And then what you can see here is I can do a little bit of filtering, see which policies I need to apply based on role. But the key point here is for every organization, for every member of an organization, the people that are in that organization have a set of security roles. They're a member of management. They're responsible for security aspects of HR, security aspects of facilities. They're a member of the incident response team or of IT. And so what we've done is we've taken all of the policy requirements that you might have in an organization, and we've cross-referenced those to the roles. So you can identify the roles of an organization, and then the software will take care of assigning those policy statements to them. Now, what you might see that's different here is if you've dealt with a lot of policies, I sometimes describe these policies as big collections of words because they're not really designed with any real thought towards what a policy is supposed to accomplish. But for us, we did design them. So our policies are high-level statements of management intent. High-level statements of management intent. And the idea here is they say, we expect you to do something. Because of the roles that you have, we expect you to do something. What's kind of cool about the way that we did this is that an individual who only is a workforce member only sees the workforce policies. They don't see the facility or the management or the IT or the HR policies. They only see the policies that apply to them. That gives us a better chance of reaching them with the policies that they need and getting them to actually read them. So they end up reading a short list of policy statements that apply to them, but they don't have to read those policy statements that don't apply. That's the key premise in terms of our policies. It tends to be a little bit different from the way a lot of organizations do it. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll jumble policies and standards and procedures together. For us, if we have something like a password standard, we create a separate document for that. So if you want to know how to set a good password, that guidance is in a password standard instead of being in a policy collection. And so we separate those out. One of the reasons we do that is because we can then send password standards separately and ask people to acknowledge those if we want to do that. I mentioned training, so we've got the ability to do training as well. You can do training a couple ways. If you log in, you can just click on this play button down here. You can also see it as a task. Since I have training that I have to do, it shows up in my security tasks. So I'm just going to click on this here. I'm not actually going to play this, but you can imagine that you'd actually be able to play it. And when you're done, you can click on I completed this training. So you could kind of move to the end, watch all of your training, and then click on I completed this training. Yes, I know I just cheated and claimed that I watched a training that I didn't actually watch. But in my defense, I have watched this training many times. And then also one of the things that we're looking at is we're looking at adding a feature to prevent people from acknowledging a training, but we're trying to figure out what fits best for an organization. Because we've seen some people that actually will watch a training by working through the training and kind of stepping through it. So we're not sure if what's going to be the best fit for organizations. And we've had some people that say, you know what, no matter what we do, they're going to cheat. So those folks are like, yeah, you don't need to do anything because they're not going to cooperate with us no matter what. But one of the ways that we're looking at it is this: is if we can get people to watch training, even if some of them acknowledge training without having viewed it, we're going to be reinforcing those behaviors with our awareness reminders. So awareness reminders come via email, and when they appear, they'll look a lot like this. The only thing that they have is they actually have this extra tip that goes with it. So every awareness reminder includes a tip that kind of backs up what we're expecting them to do with the awareness reminder. And we send one of these. Most organizations send these every week, every 2 weeks. And you get a different awareness reminder that comes, and it's reinforcing some behavior for them. What we did was we built the awareness reminders so that they reinforce primarily the behaviors that we want the workforce to do. So it's really not focused on what does management need to do, what does HR need to do. Most of our awareness reminders really focus on what everybody who's a workforce member needs to do within the organization. From a HIPAA perspective then, the idea here is that we are aiming to provide the key things that you need to do with your workforce to comply with HIPAA. Let's see. Probably now is a good time for me to log out here, and I'm going to log back in as Beverly. Any questions while I'm doing that?
I just put a little. I just said the training is very good and it's fun to watch. And I say that because I didn't create it, but I do like it. I think you maybe the first 20
Thanks.
times.
Well, for watching as many
maybe
times
the
as
first
we
20
have,
times are better than the last 40. Yeah.
That's right. So excellent. All right. So let's see. I just logged back in, and I logged in as Beverly. So what's happened now is I've logged back in as Beverly, who is the security officer within the organization. And normally we'll have one security officer, and then the other people within the organization will be who have a risk management role will be risk managers. And that's because the security officer gets a few messages that other folks don't get. But I've logged back in, and what we can see here is we can see that Timothy has acknowledged his policies and he's viewed his training. So, and then his awareness has been updated, so it's now March 4th, and we know that he's viewed an awareness message since he did that when he was logged in. So the key thing that we're doing here is we're giving an easy way to track this. Now we also can track HIPAA compliance with reporting. To do that, I'm gonna jump through here and show you how we configure an organization in Virtual Security Center. And I'll do a really quick overview because for you kind of coming from a technology perspective, you're gonna get what's going on here. We define information about the organization. We have a set of features for the software, and you might have seen there's a little incident reporting feature that actually can be really helpful for folks who are doing HIPAA stuff, because it's really designed to help you with if you have a breach, it walks you through the process for doing breach reporting. So there's a feature there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, and I'll turn it off so that I can show you what happens within the software when I turn it off. All of these features are included in Virtual Security Center, so we don't do licensing based on features, but some people will choose to only implement some of these, just depending on their own preferences. Okay, and then I'll go into compliance and show you that what we do is we track a number of different compliance requirements, and those are all configurable as well. The idea here is that when we do a risk analysis, we're doing a risk analysis of controls that are tuned to the things that you need to do to protect a server or a workstation or a laptop or a mobile device or a physical location or a vendor. So we're evaluating controls based on risk, and we're cross-referencing those controls to regulatory requirements. And so because of that, most of our risk analysis isn't compliance-oriented, it's really risk-oriented, and you'll see how that goes. This allows me to fine-tune the kinds of things that I say. If I'm an organization that doesn't ever work at hotels or conferences, I can turn off that setting, and when I do, it'll change the way that my policies are presented to folks. There's an entire suite here where I can identify how it is that I want to send email notifications to folks, and we can turn these off. We can customize what the email says. We can control when it says it, and then I can change the logo and how I describe my organization. And then this last piece of configuration shows where we can fine-tune our risk analysis. So this allows us to go in and say, well, I actually use PHI. And so because I use PHI, I want to include that as part of my risk analysis, and I want to weight it very heavily. So I can look at the kinds of data that I have and decide how much weight I want to give to each one of these. This gives us a way of prioritizing the value of the assets that control our containers, that control our data. I'll show you that in just a second. So, okay, so I've gone in, I've made a couple changes here. And so one of those changes was to add HIPAA as a compliance requirement. So you can actually already see HIPAA showing up here. One thing I guess I should note is this is an organization that I've set up in the test environment, but I haven't gone through and done the risk analysis for these locations. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and do a risk analysis. The main thing that happens with Virtual Security Center is we set it up and we allow it to track the security for the people, places, technologies, and vendors within an organization. So in that way, it's meeting the HIPAA risk analysis requirement, right? So to John's point, that's stuff that's in 164.308, right? So in 164.308, we have this set of requirements to do a HIPAA risk analysis. And the idea is for that to be a periodic risk analysis. Well, the way we really approach this is with a lot of organizations, we'll come in and do the risk analysis to start. We help you to get the tool up and running and then to run the first risk analysis. But the idea really is that afterwards, an organization can just maintain this and it keeps their risk analysis going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pick Beverly's home office. And I'll use Beverly's home office primarily because it is an easy way for me to get started on this. And so I can set up Beverly's home office, and we'll just go ahead and pick a nice home office picture. There you go. This can be Beverly's home office, and we're going to assign that to Beverly. And then I'm going to say Beverly's office has some financial information, has some business plans, some information about our customers, but no PII and PHI. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and schedule an assessment. So I can schedule assessments as either a single assessment or as a recurring assessment. So I'll just go ahead and do a single assessment, and I'm going to assign it to Beverly, so Beverly can do an assessment of her home office. And now what you can see is there's an assessment that's been scheduled for her here, and she'll actually get an email. It'll tell her that she needs to do an assessment. And then while I'm here, though, I'm going to show you a quick view of what's going on with her home office. She has some ISO 27001 compliance problems, some Hipaa compliance problems, and she's got some threats that she needs to worry about. And all of that has already been modeled for her based on the risk analysis that's kind of under the covers. So the idea here is we're going to send a self-assessment to Beverly, have her fill it out, and that's going to give us an understanding of risk for her home office. And then later we'll actually be able to use that to kind of give us some analysis. So you can see some things going on in terms of risk scores right now, and you can also see a little threat model here, but once we do the assessment, we'll get to see a little bit more of that. So I'm going to come back into the risk analysis view. We have a card view and we have a list view. I just switched views here so that we can see what's going on with Beverly's home office. And now I'm going to go into the assessment view. So this is something, again, that Beverly could get as an email. It tells her she needs to do an assessment. She can click on a task button and start doing the assessment. She can see it from her login page. She can see it from the detailed view. But now I'm going in and filling an assessment out. So we use this with organizations when they have multiple locations. We'll actually set up an assessment for each location and go through and fill out the surveys. One of the cool things about it is each of our control surveys is based on the characteristics of the location. So we have different types that we assign to a location. You could be a building, you could be an office, if you happen to be in an office that's a tenant in a multi-tenant building. You could be a home office like Beverly's. You could be a data center, a network closet, a conference room, an executive office, an unoccupied locked space. There are a bunch of different types that we can use for these. And so as you're setting up the organization, you'll define those, and then that helps us to understand how we do the risk analysis. The key thing that happens is the software is only asking questions that make sense for the type of organization that for the type of location that we're dealing with. So here I've got a monitoring alarm system, and as I go through this, so I'm just going to go through and say, okay, so Beverly goes in and says, yes, I have an alarm system. Yes, I have cameras. I clear my printers. I have recycling reminders. And I do not lock my doors, and I don't lock my windows. I don't do shredding. I don't clear my desk. So we won't debate whether that actually happens in most home offices, but I'll just go ahead and do this to show you. What I've done is I filled out an assessment, and that assessment was filled out saying that I don't lock my doors, I don't lock my windows. So you can see here that I've already calculated some risk in Virtual Security Center. I'm also going to go ahead and come back here. Because Beverly happens to also be the security officer, she gets a message letting her know that an assessment has been completed and that she needs to review it. So if I click on that button, it'll take me into the risk analysis for Beverly's home office. So here's kind of the key thing for you to see is the risk analysis has calculated different threat scores and identified that some of the compliance issues have already been addressed. But it's showing that I still have compliance issues and I've still got some risk because of the fact that Beverly doesn't lock her doors, Beverly doesn't lock her windows. Over to the left, you can see the threat model change as Beverly filled out information about her home office. Now she has more controls in place. She's got a different threat score. So what I could do is I could say, listen, Beverly, I am going to say that it's acceptable for you to lock your windows, and I'm going to save that. And then when I do that, it changes the way that I'm viewing her risk. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and ask her to fix her door locks. So I actually just created a remediation plan by going into the remediation tab and clicking on this remediation task. When I did that, it created a remediation activity for her here. So she'll actually get an email letting her know that she has a remediation task. In this case, it's asking Beverly to go ahead and lock the doors in her home office. Once she does that, she can fill out this remediation plan, and say that she's done it. So one part of what this is doing, and this is, I know it seems kind of like a sort of a hokey example, but what it does is it allows you to go through the risk analysis process and manage remediation for any object within your organization where you have to worry about these compliance issues. So in this case, what I've managed to do is I've gotten Beverly to go in, lock her doors, and I've accepted the risk for her locking her windows. Right now, we do not allow you to accept compliance. You can't basically make compliance go away just by accepting risk. And that's basically just because that's the way compliance actually works. So we can say, yeah, we're okay with the risk of these unlocked windows, but it's still a compliance requirement for somebody to lock their doors and windows. So the software is designed today to not allow you to accept a compliance risk simply because that's the way compliance tends to work in the real world. But you can see an interesting thing happened here. I'm tracking that I had accepted risk, even though my effective risk has gone down. So my weighted risk, which takes into effect the types of data that Beverly has or uses within her home office, has gone down. So this is probably one of the things I touched on, but maybe didn't explain. But if you look at this black line that's going across here, this is showing me the base risk. This is the risk based on, it's kind of like the risk without thinking about what kind of data you have. The weighted risk is the risk once we take into account data. So she doesn't store PHI at home. She doesn't store personally identifiable information about customers at home. And because of that, her risk is lower than the base risk. And so we're doing some things here that are kind of tailored towards the more sophisticated risk manager, I guess, in an organization who wants to keep track of things. And then once that's happened, then we can kind of look down here and see how our risk profile has changed based on the threat model as well. So a bunch of things here that I just glossed over. And if you want to see something in more detail or understand how something works, let me know. Otherwise, I will just kind of jump back to the next step. Any questions?
So, Dave, one of the things we talked about coming in Monday, and this team is going to come in, and John alluded to that CMS document of standards and safeguards and things, and they're going to start with the security management process. And we're going to have 4 organizations represented in there. And so how would we use this tool? They're all probably going to have separate policies. And they're probably going to want to maybe even have separate. We're going to try to standardize where we can, but they are different organizations. And I feel like this tool could possibly help us as we go through this. But I'm just wondering if, knowing where we're going to start, if you had any suggestions.
Yeah. So it's a good question. And so one of the things that tends to happen is, and this is kind of where, this is where you might end up using some consulting as well. And that is, oftentimes we have clients that use us during an assessment so that they can have a security person talking to an auditor. And so we can kind of translate questions that they have into, and give context. So part of this is they're coming in and saying, show me your security process. And there is a trick, which is to say, listen, you're looking for a security program, and our security program is documented online. This is how it works. And so sometimes you just need somebody to translate that. We're working on, trying to get that down in writing so that they can understand it. But sometimes what we'll do is we'll just work with an organization to help to sit across from the auditor and explain how things work. But that's probably not entirely what you're asking about. One of the things that can happen is an organization comes in and starts using Virtual Security Center, but they already have existing policies. And when that happens, there's 2 things that we'll do. One is we can go in and say, okay, that's great. What we'll do is we'll work with you to move the way that you do policies into the way that the policies are done within Virtual Security Center. So one thing that we'll do sometimes is an engagement where we help to translate what they currently do until the new piece. And that can work because folks are looking to be able to show that they've got policies in place, but they want to use what they've got currently, and they want to cross-reference it. All of our policies do cross-reference to the Hipaa security rules. So one of the things that we can do with an auditor is show that our policies address each of the requirements of the Hipaa security rule. So that part isn't really an issue. We do have some clients who have asked us to create a hard copy version of that as well. So sometimes what we'll do is, even though our policies are easy to see online, we'll create an offline version of it as well. But there's a couple things you could do. You can go into any one of these policies, and if you want to change the language of it, you can change the language. So sometimes folks will come in and they'll work with us just to kind of adjust it to, you can add some word to it. So when I do that, it creates a copy of this with your language and tracks that it's been modified. So you can just kind of like an organization could come in, use these policies, and make any modifications they wanted to. We have, however, had some folks who sometimes it's because they have their own review process where they'd rather use the policies that they have, but they like the idea of distributing them using a tool like this. And so for them, you can actually go in and you could take, so one thing you could do is I can just go in and add a new document. So here I'm just gonna go in and say, for policy. And then we'll just mark it as a policy, assign it to everybody in the workforce, say that it's enabled. And I can also click require acknowledgement so that I require people to view it. But then I can go in and say, this is our policy. So I could go in, set that. Now I've created a document that is my information security policy document. And then I can go back to my configuration and turn off policies. And so by doing this, I'm turning off the policy feature for the way that we do it in VSC. But you can see that information security policy has now appeared in the documentation view. So when I go in and edit this, I can see my policy just as I wrote it. So for organizations that had like a legacy document, they can just go in and quickly go from taking that policy that they had that was stored somewhere, just copy it and kind of create that.
Steve and Dave.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is, if I heard you correctly, and I think, I don't know if Dave answered your question exactly with what you brought up, but if you, is your thought that you might have 3 or 4 organizations using the same instance of Virtual Security Center, and that their policies may differ among those organizations slightly? Or were you thinking of using a separate instance for each one of the 3 or 4 organizations that you're representing?
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of been going back and forth with that, Keith, in my mind. I think each one of them is probably going to want their own instance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's probably the logical way for you to set that up. Yeah.
But I think
that way you can customize it to them.
Yeah, and so I think like in our meeting next Monday, people are going to be prepared to talk about the security management process, the 164-308A1.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to bring what policies they may already have documented. And my guess is that some may be new and some may be old. And I don't think they're so much concerned about whether they use their policy they already have or modify one that you already have that ties to Hipaa. I think what they want is an up-to-date, great policy. So I would imagine that each would want to come in and start with your policy and then modify it as they need to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my favorite way to do it. And part of that is just because one of the things that happened is, like, a lot of people have old policies that they created in 2005, 2006, 2007, right? Because that's when the HIPAA security rule came out. Some of them remembered to change it in 2013 when the omnibus came out, but many of them didn't. So they have these really old policies designed by people who really weren't thinking about why they were creating policies other than to try to hit every compliance requirement, right? But what we're trying to do is to say, listen, we understand that most people don't need to read what IT has to do. They only need to read what they need to do. So that's the way we designed the policies. So for most organizations, that's the smart thing to do, is to say, let's just forget about what we had and start using something great. And so that's kind of what we do. And then, you know, but if somebody said, well, yeah, but I have this old document, what am I going to do with that? We've actually had some people who would take the old document, include it in, say, prior version of policy, install it in the documentation, and then just use it as a reference guide. So then if an auditor comes in and says, hey, how do you do this, blah, 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 what's your past record, we can just show that to them as well. So we've also done that sort of thing for folks who needed, you know, if they were just worried about, well, what if this stuff, you know, what if there's something that I need to show an auditor? Well, we can set it up so that you'd be able to find it.
See, Dave, that you brought that up, and I think they mentioned that too, that specifically there's a team from CP Rochester, and they keep every version of policy that they've ever created just so they have a sort of a track record of changes, why they made the changes, and when they made the changes, and in response to what in the security rule change that, you know, was the impetus for them to change their policy.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's the kind of thing where, you know, they could do that. You know, they could really do that with documentation here, or they, you know, sometimes you still just create a PDF of things. But that's absolutely something that they should be looking to do. And what this does is it allows you to go in and kind of manage those changes and kind of demonstrate it. But then the key thing is too, what we're doing, we hope, is allowing people to go from having a security program in a binder to having a security program that you can use to do the things that you need to do. Let's see, I feel like we're probably scheduled for 3 o'clock, and I want to show as a wrap-up time, although I'm available to go sooner. But one of the things I wanted to show also was that we're just rolling out this procedures aspect of it, and so it's a new feature that's coming out. Dang, the test system doesn't have the procedure loaded. So I won't be able to demonstrate this on this system, but the procedures are actually going to give us a set of checklists that you can complete as well. So there are 34 checklists that will be in this initial release. And so these are for things like onboarding a new workforce member, onboarding a new vendor, making configuration changes to systems, managing disposal of a system. So those sorts of things that you need to have processes for will actually be checklists. They'll look similar to the assessments. So there'll be a checklist for those that will allow you to walk through the processes for an organization. So I wanted to mention that, although my test system doesn't have the procedures installed yet. And then actually I'll show you one other thing that I think is kind of cool. And this is something your clients wouldn't necessarily do, but it might be really helpful for you and your team. So you can be a member of multiple organizations, right? So if you've got 4 clients and they're all using Virtual Security Center, and your team is involved in managing security for their technology, right? Then this allows you to log in, and you could have your own security program in an instance of this. But I can actually switch between organizations. So I can just go to my pull-down menu, and I can be like, oh yeah, I was in Those Darn Humans, and then I'm going to change to Lopter. And when I do that, then it switches me straight right between each organization. So that way, you as a, from a service provider perspective, you can be doing the security things you need to do in their security program from within their virtual security center. But it's super easy for you because you can just switch between organizations.
Well, in one of the organizations that's in here, they represent 3 different companies as well. So would it, Dave, given what you just showed, and obviously at the end of the day, we want to do what's best for the clients, but CIS continues to try to be the central, management of all this. We try to be the conglomerator of these different things. Is there any way that you could see this making sense if we had the virtual security center just for CIS and we had those other companies be, companies associated with CIS?
Yeah, so I guess the thing I'd say is it wouldn't change the cost. And so because of that, it probably isn't the approach that you take. What I'd suggest is that, again, at the risk of sounding like a sales guy, CIS should have their own security program set up in Virtual Security Center also, right? So that you've got your own policies taken care of. But, I'm sure we could figure out a way to make that happen. What you would probably do is you'd set up CIS, you'd set up your team so that you could move between the different organizations, but you do want them to run their own security programs. And when they're doing reporting, you want them to be able to do their own reporting for their security program. So you'd probably just do that. Now, what we can do is we can set up we have a reseller feature built into this. So you could use that as well so that you'd have an ability to manage those organizations. So what that allows you to do is there's a little control panel that allows you to manage the customers that are underneath you. So you could set up VSC and work with those organizations, and you can actually make some changes to their environment without having to go into them directly. So that's probably the way you do it, is you'd set up for each one of them, you'd set up an organization. And if you had somebody who was like a parent organization of 3 others, then you'd probably just set up, an organization for each one of those.
Sure, and I appreciate the part about the money. I think for us, we're trying to, and again, I want to say this in a healthy way, not a devious way, but to the extent we can set up dependencies, we like to be, needed by these people. And if it makes sense to set them up so they can work independently of us, that's one thing. But to the extent we can keep people dependent on CIS and kind of keep CIS in the middle of this, so there's a continued need for CIS in the middle, that's a great thing too.
Cool. Yeah. The way I look at that is, because we're not an operational security company, we're not in the business of running the day-to-day, technical security. We just don't do that. But somebody has to. And what this tool does is it allows you to show the risk analysis, and so you can, just as an example, if I'm going in and I'm using, say you've got somebody who's using Office 365, right? So if they're using Office 365, then they need to make sure that it's secured properly. So what you could do, what you would do is you'd go in and set this, and you can go in and pick that, and then I'm going to go ahead and just assign this here and do a couple buttons to show that. So I can go in, and for every technology that I have, I can create I can create a container, is what we call it. So I can create this container, and I can assign it to somebody to fill out a survey. And so part of what should happen is your IT company should be going in there and checking the security of Office 365, say, every quarter. And that's what I actually just did. I just created a quarterly recurring task for somebody in IT to go through and fill out a security assessment. So that's one way that you get IT involved. From my perspective, I say that's because I need them to be involved, right? But from your perspective, you'd say, all right, we've just gone in and said, yeah, part of our role in your organization is to be doing these security checks of technology. We need to do this every quarter, every month, whatever. And you can use this as a way that you manage patch releases and things like that. So what it does is it helps you to reinforce the behaviors that you know are important as an IT provider, but sometimes the client doesn't recognize it. We're actually, with the procedures and risk analysis, we're helping them to show red when they don't do good security things.
So I know we're bumping up at 3 o'clock. If I could just ask one question off of that, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
With the clients that we support, if we get busy and we're, 3 days behind on a patch, will they be able to look at this and then call us up and say, hey, you guys are 3 days behind?
I guess so. So yeah, so here's the way this would work in practice. First of all, what we're not doing is integrating with your patch management system. We are looking for you to provide reporting about how this activity works. So what you probably would do is you'd say, well, if patch management is a thing that we're going to do every month, then you'd go in and you'd set like you might set a recurring task to happen on Patch Tuesday. And then what you do is you would set the due date for that as 14 days. So if you went in and said, okay, this assumes that makes sense to you guys, but what you do is you control both when you set up the procedure and how long you give for the procedure to be completed. So your trick would be to figure out what fits for your SLA.
So, I mean, really briefly, if Patch Tuesday comes out, we typically wait a week or two. Say we wait 2 weeks, then we could set the due date for 3 weeks after that event, which gives us our 2 weeks plus a week slack.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the way for you to do it. And I'd say from your perspective, what'll happen is you'd have to pick up, okay, what are my due dates? Now the system will email you and it will nag you if you don't do things. So you can configure some of those things to just kind of help with that. You may end up having a ticketing system that you want to use as well. So you might end up, having to work out like how do you take that task, turn it into a trouble ticket if you're managing it there. But yeah, this gives you kind of that way to do it. When we were doing the design, part of what we were thinking is how do we get people to use their IT provider to do good security things? And so some of the features that we built into this really are trying to drive towards that.
Got it.
Okay.
So for Monday, for Dave to be on site and to at least observe or consult, or how do you want to play Monday?
Well, I'm trying to figure out if we could do kind of two things at one task. One would be to get the demo, but the other would be to kind of, I keep thinking if we could take that very first one and use that.
Use as a use case for the demo.
Yeah, that would be a great thing.
Is that something that would be feasible, Dave?
Okay, so describe to me what you're thinking in terms of that.
So they basically grab this CMS security standards list,
mm-hmm.
and they're going to go through this one at a time in order of how it's printed on this document. Actually, it's printed in order of the sections, 106.4, 308, A1, A2, A3. So we were going to go over the first one on the 11th. And so I'm just curious as if we could take that as the standard and share policies that are relevant to that. They're going to be bringing their policies that they already have as part of the demo. I think it would be interesting to see how we would walk that through your software.
Yeah.
So first one on the list?
Yeah.
Cool. I also forgot to show you my compliance reporting. So, keeping in mind that this environment, I haven't done any of the risk analysis that I need to do, so it shows a whole bunch of red. But from a standpoint of like these standards and implementation specifications that go with the Hipaa security rule, these are all of those. And so as you start setting up your risk analysis and completing risk analysis activities, it gives you the report on compliance. So things go from red to green.
Well, and Dave, I think that's where you would start the demo and the discussion at this point. Cool. What time's the meeting?